My cat woke me up at 3 in the morning, not because she was hungry, but because the world was suddenly an emergency. She jumped on my bed, sniffed my face, and then acted like I was the only person who could solve the drama. And in that moment I thought, okay, this is ridiculous, but somehow it also feels important, as if she really wanted to tell me something real. That's exactly what today is about. The little stories that only cat owners truly understand. The ones that make you laugh and catch your throat at the same time. They'll tell you about my cat, about moments that are absurd and yet land deep in your chest. Because love sometimes looks so silly and still feels completely right. And at the end, they'll share what has stayed with me the most years later when I think of her, even on the days she drove me crazy. But first, imagine you're sitting at your desk, a tight deadline, your head full, and suddenly there's a pause statement on your keyboard, as if your work is just decoration. My cat has sent more emails than I ever intended, and every single one basically just meant, I'm here, and you are mine, even if you pretend to be busy. The funny thing is that she knows exactly when I'm most stressed, and then she gets extra sweet, as if she has a master's in manipulation and a PhD in cuddling. And right in the moment I want to get mad, she closes her eyes, purrs softly, and I feel my neck just relax, as if someone released a brake. By the way, if you think cats are cold, just wait until the first time you cry and she simply lies down next to you. No drama, no speech. Just being there. That's one of those moments that surprised me back then, because I expected animals to only react when things get loud. But she was quiet and still so present. But here is something many overlook when they label cats as independent. Independence doesn't mean she doesn't need a bond, but that she shows it in her own way. My cat never greeted me with a loud hello and lots of fuss, but she watched me when I came home, as if she was internally opening a door that no one sees. Sometimes she sat on the windowsill and pretended not to care about me, and 2 seconds later she was lying against my leg, as if it were the safest place in the world. I laughed because it was so typical, this proud little game, and at the same time it warmed my heart. Because trust in cats often looks like a secret. And then came the day she decided that every empty box in this apartment was suddenly a throne, no matter how ugly the packaging was. She climbed in, curled up, and looked at me as if she had just conquered a castle, while I just wanted to take out the trash. I took photos, even though it was absurd, and I swear to you, those pictures mean more to me today than some beautiful souvenirs that looked perfectly staged. Cats love boundaries, edges, little caves, and sometimes that's the funniest part. They choose the cheapest thing and turn it into a royal box, purely with attitude. Between us, there was also this constant quiet judgment when I went to bed too late or stayed on my phone too long. That look from the sofa that says, "Human, you're embarrassing, but I'm staying." I called it the judgmental side-eye, and it often made me smirk because it felt like I had a little life coach with whiskers. But wait, let's do a quick reality check, because not everything is cute, and that's a good thing. Otherwise the story would be too smooth and not honest enough. Sometimes she really annoyed me, like when she attacked the curtains at 4 in the morning as if they were prey, and I was just the poor witness of a nature documentary. I got up, whispered, laughed, and internally whimpered, and that's exactly the funny misery of it. You're exhausted, but somehow you're also proud of her energy. Cats have these zoom eyes, this sudden frenzy, as if the universe secretly mixed sugar into their coffee, and then there's silence again, as if nothing happened. My apartment was too small for her Olympics, and yet she managed to stage an epic drama in 3 meters of hallway, complete with drifting and parkour. And if you think that's just playing, then you haven't seen how seriously she drinks water afterward, as if she just won a marathon. But amidst all the chaos, there were also these tiny rituals that caught me emotionally, without warning, simply because they were so everyday. Every evening, almost like clockwork, she came and lay down so that her head landed exactly where my hand wanted to go anyway. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a quiet we're a team. And sometimes that's exactly the part one still think about today when things get loud outside. You always hear that purring can calm humans down, but I don't want to give you a lecture. I'll just say, it worked for me, without me ever planning it. It wasn't magical in a fairy tale sense, it was a physical feeling, a vibration that acted like a small proof that calmness can be learned when someone trusts you. But here comes the part that literally took my breath away the first time, because I didn't understand it for a long time, even though it happened right in front of my eyes. Sometimes she looked at me and blinked slowly, and I thought she was tired, until someone told me that for cats, that can be like a kiss with their eyes. Since then, I've blinked back, and it felt so silly, and at the same time so intimate, as if we were using a secret code that needs no language. If you've never tried it, do it once, but not forced, just lightly, like a little experiment between you and your animal. And now let's quickly jump to something completely different. Otherwise it'll get too sentimental before I've even told the funniest moments. My cat went through a phase where she thought every plastic bag on the floor was a threat, and at the same time she absolutely had to step into it. It was pure comedy, this mix of courage and panic, and I sat on the couch and just watched how life is cheaper than Netflix. She stepped in, the bag rustled, she jumped, and a second later she acted like she was never nervous. Classic cat on her. Then there was the food story that drives every cat owner crazy at some point and simultaneously turns into an internal stand-up show. I buy expensive food, put it down, she sniffs it, turns around, and eats 3 kibbles as if it were a tasting at a Michelin-starred restaurant that she refuses to endorse. The next day she eats the exact same thing as if she had never doubted it. And I stand there wondering if I live in a relationship with a food critic. And if you think that's a coincidence, welcome to the club. Cats love consistency, until they decide that consistency is boring, and then everything is up for renegotiation. I learned not to take personally what looks personal, and that was a life lesson I wouldn't have learned in a seminar. In between, she also taught me what boundaries mean, especially when she ignored me even though I called her name, sweetly, loudly, and in vain. She heard it, that was clear, because an ear twitched slightly, but her body said, "No, not today. Today I'm a mysterious creature, and you are just noise." I laughed because it seemed so human, this deliberate non-reaction, and I got annoyed because I actually wanted to cuddle, not debate. But that's exactly what makes cats so fascinating. They are not your accessory, they are a roommate with opinions, and sometimes that opinion is simply no. And then, hours later, she comes and lies right on my chest, as if she never said no, as if the world was completely fine again, without explanation. That's emotional because you realize, closeness doesn't come on demand, it comes as a gift, and gifts feel different than obligations. I remember a rainy day when we were both trapped at home, gray outside, quiet inside, and suddenly the sofa was our entire universe. She paced up and down, watched the windows, acted as if the rain was a personal insult, and I made tea and just watched her. It was nothing special, and exactly for that reason it was beautiful, because contentment sometimes looks like boredom, until you realize it's peace. Speaking of peace, have you ever seen a cat staring at nothing and suddenly you imagine your apartment is haunted, even though you're a rational person? My cat fixated on a wall for minutes, and I slowly got closer, looked, and there was literally nothing, except paint and my paranoia. I laughed and gave myself goosebumps at the same time, because animals sometimes take us to the border between funny and spooky, without even knowing it. And yes, I know, many say cats are quirky, but quirky is often just a word for, I need security my way, not yours. When I brought her home for the first time, she was tiny and hid under the sofa, and I sat on the floor and spoke softly, as if she were a new roommate in a panic. I didn't pull, I didn't push, I just put down water, food, a litter box, and then I gave her the space you need when you're afraid of the new. Hours later, a little face appeared, curious, cautious, and that moment was more emotional than any big speech. Because trust begins before it becomes visible. She sniffed my hand, backed away, came back, and I had tears in my eyes because I suddenly understood how fragile beginnings are. And then came the years when she learned where the best sunlight falls, which blanket is the softest, and which chair officially belongs to her, whether I knew it or not. I had scratch marks on furniture and at the same time a guilty conscience, because I knew she needed that, even if my adult self protested. We found compromises, scratching posts, toys, and sometimes I simply accepted that a sofa has a life too, and isn't just decor. In between all this, there was the classic vet moment that every owner knows. Carrier drama, as if the world were ending, even though it's just an appointment. My cat acted as if I were betraying her, and I comforted her and laughed inside, because the theater was so serious and I knew it came out of love. And when the vet said she was brave, I somehow felt honored too, as if it was teamwork, as if we both achieved something without words. But here is a little truth that hurts, because it's honest. As time goes by, animals slow down, and you notice it in the little things, not on a calendar date. She doesn't jump as high anymore. She sleeps longer, she still comes to you, but the path seems a bit more difficult. And you notice how your heart keeps track of that. I tried not to overwrite that with panic, but with gentleness, more pillows, easier to reach places, and a pace that honors her dignity. Because love with cats often looks like routine. The same bowl, the same corner, the same night sounds, and right in there is something huge that is easily underestimated. And if you think that sounds sad now, let me tell you that in the same breath, there is also something beautiful that I wouldn't want to miss. Growing old doesn't just mean loss, it also means we had time, we had stories, we had these silly, sacred everyday moments that nobody films, but everybody feels. My cat taught me to breathe slower when the world is loud, simply because purring can act like a metronome for your nerves, without you having to force it. I'm not saying this to make it sound mystical, but because I physically experienced how stress shrinks when someone who simply trusts you is lying next to you. In between, she also made me angry, like when she almost knocked over a vase, and I loudly said no, and she looked at me as if I was unpredictable. Later I was annoyed with myself because I had forgotten that mistakes and nerves are part of life, even in relationships you love. And we found each other again, without a big speech, simply through closeness, through food, through a new routine. Through this quiet we keep going. There's also the story of the first vacation, when I had to trust someone to feed her, and I was almost weird on my phone, like a parent at the first day of kindergarten. She played it cool outside, cautious with the stranger at home, and I realized how much caring from a distance feels like a tangled mess of cables in your stomach. When I came back, it was as if she scolded me for 2 minutes, and then all was forgotten, because her most important proof was, "You are back." That touched me, because loyalty isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply, I stay with you when you return, without handing you a bill. And now, right in the middle of all these anecdotes, a quick pattern interrupt, otherwise you'll forget how funny cats are with technology, even though they act superior. My cat used my laptop as a heating pad and simultaneously acted as if me typing was an insult to her royal spine. She triggered notifications, closed tabs, and I swore she had a secret side business, if only I could crack the code. Between a joke and madness, with cats, there's often only an inch, and exactly there is where the magic lies. Because you never know if she's testing you or saving you. There were nights when she walked through the apartment like a guard, even though nothing happened, and I felt safer, without it making rational sense. Maybe it was just habit, maybe it was instinct, but I slept because her presence was like a silent alarm that said, someone else is still awake here, in a good way. And if you've ever lived alone, You know how big this little presence can become without it saying a single word. Sometimes she dreamed, her paws twitched, her tail flicked slightly, and I whispered, "Keep running," even though I had no idea what she was dreaming about. That was sweet and somehow melancholic, because animals' dreams remind us that inner lives don't just belong to humans, even if we can never fully translate them. I also learned that playtime isn't a luxury, it's bonding, even when you're tired and actually just want to crash on the couch. 10 minutes with a feather wand sometimes helped more than any explanation, because movement is like a little reset button for cats too. And when she lay panting on the floor afterward, looking proud, I clapped internally, and felt as happy as after a little victory that only we understood. But I also don't want to cut out the embarrassing moments, because they are honest, and that's why they connect us. Once, she ran between my legs when I was greeting guests, almost making me fall, and everyone laughed, while I just said sorry for my heart that briefly stopped. She was proud, confused, completely uninvolved in my knee pain, and that is exactly a cat. Charm without guilt, and somehow enviable. There was also the phase where she only wanted to drink from a specific bowl, as if any other bowl was an insult to her ancestors. I washed the bowl, moved it, refilled it, and she looked as if I were committing a crime, until suddenly everything was normal again. Stories like that sound small, but they aren't, because a relationship consists of 1,000 little negotiations, not of one big movie moment. And if you ask me what made me laugh the most, it's this mix of high standards and low material, a queen in a cardboard box. I bought an expensive bed, and she loved the box, and I wondered if that was a joke from the universe or life advice about simplicity. Maybe it's both, and maybe that's okay, because cats sometimes bring us back to a world where enough is suddenly clearer than more. It always gets emotional for me when I think about how quiet she was sometimes when I was sick, and how close she came then, without asking if I wanted company. She didn't talk, she didn't diagnose, she was just there, and in a world that loudly screams for performance. Being there is a radical tenderness. I don't want to make big speeches about saying goodbye here, but I want to be honest. Anyone who loves an animal carries somewhere the premonition that time ends. Not dramatically, not constantly, but like a shadow at the edge that makes you suddenly feel the little moments more consciously. And that is exactly why the funny stories are so important, because they not only make life sweet, but make it tangible while it's happening. My cat taught me to pose less and live more, because animals aren't impressed by your job title, only by whether you are gentle. She taught me that patience is not a defeat, but sometimes the only language that builds trust when someone is afraid. She taught me that care often looks like repetition. Food, water, cleanliness, time, and that repetition can be love without sounding romantic. And she taught me to laugh when I was most likely to lose control, because humor is sometimes the life preserver an animal brings you without realizing it. Sometimes I still wake up out of habit just before 3 in the morning, and half asleep, I wonder if that training from back then is now a compliment or a curse. There was also the vacuum cleaner, which she thought was a monster, while simultaneously being curious about it, as if horror and entertainment were the same Netflix category. She darted under the sofa, peeked out again, and I turned off the vacuum and laughed, because caring sometimes means the noise has to wait. At the window, she watched birds, with this focused look, as if she were internally compiling statistics on wings. And I drank coffee and counted along. In winter, she lay on my knees like a little radiator with a personality, and I told myself that coziness isn't a human invention, but a joint project. In summer, she stretched out on the cool tile floor, acting as if it were a luxury resort, while I was sweating and envying her priorities. Once she buried a broken toy as if it were a treasure, and I dug it up again, and she looked at me as if I had misunderstood archaeology. And here is a little bridge moment, because I want to quickly invite you to take a deep breath. If a scene of your cat is flashing through your mind right now, totally without pressure. Because memories don't always hurt. Sometimes they are like a warm coat that you only notice when you're cold and suddenly feel how much history you've already shared. My cat also showed me that affection isn't always more, but sometimes just right. A chin, an ear, a paw, exactly where it fits. And if you sometimes wonder if you are enough for your animal, remember that your everyday life is often bigger for them than any vacation you could plan. If you think of your cat right now, I'm sure a scene instantly comes to mind that no one else would understand. And that is exactly the one that counts. Maybe it's a look, a sound, a habit, a cardboard box, a sunbeam, a moment when she saved you, without having to play the hero. I invite you to feel this moment briefly, not to get sentimental, but to realize how much story is packed into a single everyday life. And if you like, write in the comments which story is so typical for you that friends without cats think you're exaggerating, even though you're telling the truth. I love reading that, because in these details we have a community that is often quiet, but huge when you put it all together. In the end, this image remains for me. An animal that makes the world small by lying next to you, while outside everything is getting complicated. Not perfect, not always comfortable, sometimes loud at 3 in the morning, sometimes stubborn, sometimes hilarious, but always a part of what home means. And if you take only one thing away today, let it be this. The best stories are often the ones that look like nothing until you realize they were everything. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving your cat a chance to change you, even when she acts like she isn't. Take care of yourself, take care of her, and when she wakes you up again tonight, remember that drama is sometimes just love with too much energy.